The worst part wasn't being left behind. The worst part was realizing I had handed them the keys literally and figuratively, and they had used them to lock me out. I never imagined that the proudest moment of my life, the morning I wrote a check to cover the final down payment on my son and daughter-in-law's house, would be the first brick in a wall they were quietly building between us. My name is Dorothy. I'm 63 years old. I taught second grade for 31 years at Millbrook Elementary in a small town in Ohio, and I raised my son, Marcus, alone after his father passed. When Marcus was 11, I didn't have much. A teacher's salary, a modest house I'd inherited from my mother, and a stubbornness about making sure my son had every opportunity I never did. I drove a car with a cracked dashboard for 6 years because I was putting money away for Marcus's college. I clipped coupons until my fingers ached. I said no to myself so many times that no started to feel like my first language. When Marcus married Nicole 4 years ago, I told myself this was everything I had worked for. He was happy. He had a good job in project management. She was a dental hygienist with sharp eyes and a sharper smile. I wanted to love her. I genuinely did. The house came up 8 months after the wedding. They had found a place in a quiet neighborhood in Columbus, a 3-bedroom colonial with a small yard and a finished basement. Good school district. Solid bones. The asking price was $340,000. Marcus called me on a Tuesday evening, nervous in that way he gets where he laughs a little between sentences, and explained that they were $11,000 short on the down payment. I didn't hesitate. I want to be honest about that. I did not pause. I did not sleep on it. I did not ask a single question. I said, I'll wire it tomorrow. And I did. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't discover until much later, was that Nicole had already spoken to a real estate attorney about how jointly contributed funds affect property ownership in Ohio. She had looked into it before Marcus even made the call. I tell you this not to make her a villain from the first sentence, but because you need to understand what I was walking into while I was smiling and writing checks. After the down payment, it was other things. Small things, at first. Marcus mentioned their car needed new brakes. And I helped. Nicole's student loan payment was higher than expected that month, and I quietly added to what I was already sending. Then it became a pattern without anyone naming it every few months. A need would arise, and I would fill it, because that is what I had always done. That is who I had always been. I moved in with them, 14 months after they bought the house. It was presented as a mutual solution. My old house needed a new roof, and the HVAC system was failing, and the repairs would have wiped out most of what I had left in savings. Marcus suggested I sell my place, put that money away for retirement, and take the spare bedroom at their house while I figured out my next step. He said it like it was the obvious, sensible thing. Nicole was standing next to him in my kitchen when he said it, nodding, her arms crossed loosely, and she said, "We have the space, Dorothy." It just makes sense. I believed her. I sold my mother's house for $212,000. I kept that money in a separate account. I told Marcus this, and he said, "Of course, Mom. That's yours." And Nicole nodded again. I contributed to the household. I want to be clear about that. I paid a fair portion of the utilities each month. I bought groceries more often than not. I cooked dinner 4 nights a week because I got home before either of them, and it gave me something to do with my hands. I watched their dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit, when they traveled. I helped Nicole's mother move a piece of furniture once when she stopped by and Nicole wasn't home, and Nicole thanked me with a kind of surprised warmth, like she hadn't expected me to be useful. I thought we were building something. A family with some friction at the edges, sure, but a real family. The Christmas trip was the first warning sign I let myself ignore. Marcus mentioned in October that they were thinking about taking a trip to Vermont for the holidays, just the two of them. A little getaway, a cozy inn, skiing. He said it with his eyes slightly averted, which I recognized from when he was 12 and had broken something he hadn't told me about yet. I said it sounded lovely. I said I'd be fine. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table after he went upstairs. And I told myself it was normal for married couples to want their own holiday traditions. I spent Christmas Eve alone in their house watching a film I'd already seen twice, and I told no one. In January, Nicole began closing the door to the room they used as a home office when she was on the phone. That was new. She had never bothered before. I wasn't trying to listen, but the walls in that house weren't thick, and once or twice I caught a sentence or two, something about the arrangement, something about it can't go on indefinitely. I assumed she meant a work situation. I am embarrassed now by how hard I worked to assume the best. The atmosphere shifted in ways I couldn't point to directly. Nicole stopped asking me if I wanted tea when she made a pot for herself. Marcus started having whole conversations with her in their bedroom with the door shut. Conversations that would pause if I walked down the hall. The three of us ate dinner together less often. These were not dramatic events. They were small disappearances, 1 degree of coldness at a time, and by the time I felt the chill, I had been standing in it for months. In March, Marcus told me about the cruise. He came into the kitchen on a Sunday morning while I was washing the breakfast dishes. He leaned against the counter and said that he and Nicole were taking a big trip, a 10-day Caribbean cruise in June with Nicole's family. Her parents, her sister and brother-in-law, her 2 nieces. A family trip, he said. A real celebration because Nicole's father was turning 70. I turned off the water. I dried my hands. I said, "That sounds wonderful. Should I look into flights home to see your Aunt Peg while you're away?" He looked at the floor. "Mom," he said, "it's Nicole's family organized it. It's really a her side thing." "Of course," I said. "That makes sense." I smiled at him. I went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at my hands in my lap and thought about nothing at all for a very long time. I did not cry. I was past the age of crying over things I could see clearly. What I did instead was begin to pay closer attention. I started noticing the mail. Not going through it, it sat in a basket in the hallway, and I could see it when I walked past. One afternoon in April, I spotted an envelope with a return address I recognized. Hartwell and Bloom, a property law firm in Columbus. I had driven past their office on Reed Street a dozen times. I didn't touch the envelope. I walked past it and went into the kitchen and stood there for a moment. And then I went back and I looked at it again. It was addressed to Nicole. I put it back exactly as I found it. I went to my room and I sat in the chair by the window. And I thought about what I knew. I had contributed $11,000 to the down payment. In Ohio, that contribution, depending on how it was structured, could give me a partial ownership interest in the property, or it could be considered a gift with no legal standing whatsoever. I had given it with no paperwork, no written agreement, no witnesses. I had given it the way I gave everything out of love and without conditions, because conditions felt like distrust, and I had never wanted to distrust my son. The law firm on that envelope did not do personal injury cases or estate planning. I had seen their advertisements. They specialized in real estate and property disputes. I opened my laptop that night, and I spent 2 hours reading. The following week, I called my own attorney, a woman named Patricia Graves, who had helped me sell my mother's house the year before. I explained the situation without drama. I told her about the down payment, about living in the house, about the letter from Hartwell and Bloom. I asked her what my options were. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dorothy, do you have any documentation of the $11,000? A bank transfer record? Anything in writing?" "I have the wire transfer receipt," I said. "Good," she said. "That's something. Now, do you want to understand your options in general, or do you want to move quickly?" I told her I wanted to move quickly. I said this calmly. I surprised myself. Patricia and I spoke 3 more times over the following 2 weeks. She explained what I could and couldn't claim. She explained what the transfer receipt established. She told me that if Nicole had indeed consulted an attorney about property contributions, she was likely building a case to have my interest formally dismissed to characterize the $11,000 as a gift, remove any ambiguity, and potentially position themselves to ask me to leave the property in a way I would have little legal standing to contest. She was doing this quietly, before I had any idea there was a game being played. I thought about Marcus. I thought about him at 11 years old, eating cereal for dinner the night after his father's funeral, because I had been too exhausted to cook, and he had quietly gotten up and made himself a bowl without complaining. I thought about every school play I sat in the front row for, every science fair project I helped with until midnight, every time I said yes when every practical instinct said no. I thought about that, and then I told Patricia to begin preparing the paperwork. On a Thursday evening in mid-May, Marcus came home from work and found me sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a quiet expression. He asked how my day was. I said it was fine. I asked him how his was. We talked about a road construction project that was making his commute longer. Nicole came home 40 minutes later, said hello without looking at me directly, and went upstairs. After dinner, Marcus mentioned that they were leaving for the cruise on June 7th. 17 days away. I said, I'll make sure Biscuit is taken care of. He looked relieved in a way he tried to hide. I spent the next week doing things methodically and without grief. I contacted a real estate agent named Sandra Okafor, who came highly recommended by Patricia. Sandra walked through the house on a Saturday morning while Marcus and Nicole were at her parents' place, and she told me the market was strong, that a house in that neighborhood and condition would likely move fast. I explained the legal situation, my ownership interest, the documentation, Patricia's guidance. Sandra was professional and unshaken. She said, "Let's get this on the market." I want to pause here and tell you what this felt like, because it wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter and more solid than anger. It was the feeling of finally understanding the shape of a room you've been standing in the dark. Not relief exactly, but clarity. I had spent 4 years pouring myself into a version of this family that existed mostly in my own imagination. The real version had been making other arrangements. Now I was making mine. I packed my belongings over several evenings while they were home, a little at a time, so nothing would look sudden. I took my mother's quilt from the closet shelf. I took the framed photograph of Marcus at 8 years old sitting in a pile of autumn leaves, the one I had kept on my dresser for 20 years. I took my grandmother's mixing bowl, the blue ceramic one with the small chip in the rim, and wrapped it in a dish towel. I took everything that was mine. I left everything that was theirs exactly where it was. My attorney finalized the paperwork. My ownership interest in the property established by the wire transfer documentation and supported by my 14 months of financial contribution to the household was converted. The house was listed. An offer came in within 9 days. It was a strong offer, nearly full asking price, from a young couple who were expecting their first child and wanted to be in the neighborhood before fall. The closing was scheduled for June 9th. 2 days after Marcus and Nicole's cruise departed, I arranged to stay with my college friend Renee in Dayton for a few weeks. Renee had been divorced for 6 years and had a spare room and a large porch and opinions about everything, and I loved her without reservation. I told her I needed a landing place, and she said, "Get in the car, Dorothy. I'll have the coffee on." On the evening of June 6th, the night before they left, I made dinner. Roasted chicken and green beans and the garlic bread Marcus had loved since he was a teenager. The three of us sat at the table and ate and talked about ordinary things, whether a storm was coming through the weekend, whether Nicole's sister had confirmed her flights. I refilled the water glasses. I listened to them make plans in the comfortable, abbreviated way of people who share a life. I had already said my real goodbye. I had said it to the house, walking through it one last time the night before, turning off lights. After dinner, Marcus helped me clear the table without being asked, which he rarely did, and I thought, he knows something is shifting, even if he doesn't know what. Children always feel it. Even when they are grown and have built walls and turned away, some old instinct still registers the temperature of a room. "I'll miss you, Mom," he said, carrying plates to the kitchen. He said it casually, the way you say something true when you're not quite ready to mean it fully. "I'll miss you too," I said. I left a letter on the kitchen counter the following morning, weighted down by the spare house key. The letter was short. I told Marcus that I loved him, that I had loved him every day of his life without exception, and that I was choosing now to love myself with the same consistency. I told him the house was listed, that he and Nicole would receive what was legally theirs from the sale, and that the rest would follow me into the next chapter of my life. I told him that I was not angry. This was the truest thing I wrote. I was genuinely not angry. I was simply finished. I asked him, when he was ready, to call me. Not to explain or apologize or argue about what was fair. Just to call. Because he was still my son, and that didn't stop when everything else did. I walked out to my car in the early morning before the neighborhood woke up. Biscuit followed me to the door and sat there watching me load the last bag into the trunk, his tail moving in that slow, uncertain way dogs have when something doesn't feel right. I went back and knelt on the front step and held his face in both hands and told him he was a very good boy. Then I got in the car and I drove. The drive to Dayton takes about an hour and 40 minutes. I listened to a radio program about the migratory patterns of monarch butterflies, which I found unexpectedly comforting. Renee had coffee on when I arrived. She didn't make me talk about it, just set a mug in front of me and asked if I wanted cream, and we sat on her big porch and watched the morning come in, and I felt something in my chest begin, slowly, to loosen. The closing happened without incident. Patricia handled everything. The young couple took possession of the house on a sunny Wednesday, and I hope they are happy there. I genuinely do. That house deserved happy people. Marcus called on a Thursday afternoon, 8 days after they returned from the cruise. I was in Renee's backyard reading a novel, a real one, something I hadn't made time for in months. When his name appeared on my phone, I set the book down and breathed for a moment before I answered. He didn't shout. He wasn't cruel. He was stunned, which was its own kind of hard to hear the voice of someone who genuinely had not seen something coming because he had never taken the time to look. He said, "Mom, what did you do?" Not a question, a slow realization falling through him like a stone through water. I said, "I did what I should have done much sooner, Marcus. I took care of myself." There was a long silence. In it, I heard 14 months of dinners I cooked and grocery bags I carried, and evenings I spent alone in a room in a house that had never fully felt like home. I heard every time I told myself to be patient, be generous, be grateful for whatever space they gave me. He said Nicole was furious. I said I understood. He said there were legal questions. I said that Patricia would answer those. He said, "I don't understand why you didn't just talk to me." And I said, very quietly, "Marcus, I talked to you in Vermont. I talked to you every dinner. I talked to you when you said it was a Herside family trip. I was talking to you the whole time. You just weren't listening." He had no answer for that. We did not fix anything that day. You don't fix decades of learning in a single phone call. But before he hung up, he said, in a voice that was younger and smaller than his regular voice, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I am. I actually am." That surprised both of us, I think. I found my apartment 2 months later, a 2-bedroom on the second floor of a building, in a town called Hartfield, 40 minutes from Columbus and 3 blocks from a park with walking trails along a small river. The kitchen has a window that faces east and gets the morning light in a way that makes the whole room feel warm by 8 o'clock. I have my grandmother's mixing bowl on the counter and my mother's quilt on the bed and the photograph of Marcus at 8 years old on the shelf in the hallway, where I can see it when I walk past. I started a small reading group with 3 women from the building. On Tuesday evenings, we sit in whoever's apartment has the most snacks, and we talk about books and occasionally about our lives. And it is the most honest company I have kept in years. I am not waiting for Marcus to become a different person. I am not waiting for Nicole to apologize, or for any version of the past to retroactively make sense. What I am doing, for perhaps the first time in my adult life, is living forward instead of giving backward. Marcus and I speak on the phone every few weeks. The conversations are careful and not unkind. He told me last month that Nicole had taken a new position at a different practice. He told me that they're thinking about the future. I listened and I asked questions and I meant them. He hasn't said he's sorry, but once, at the end of a call, he said, "Mom, I know I'm not always good at this." I said, "I know. Me either." Maybe that's where we start. Not with an apology, not with everything resolved and explained and forgiven in the clean way it happens in films, but with 2 people who love each other, imperfectly, trying again from a distance that is honest about what it is. Some people have asked me, Renee, the women in my reading group, whether I regret any of it. The money, the years, the house, all of it. I don't. That's the answer that still surprises me when it comes out of my mouth. I don't regret what I gave. I gave it freely, and I knew what I was doing. What I regret is waiting so long to understand that generosity without a floor under it is not generosity at all. It's just disappearing, one quiet contribution at a time. I'm not disappearing anymore. On Sunday mornings, I walk the trail along the river. The light is different there depending on the season, and I've started noticing that. A few weeks ago, there was a morning in early autumn when the trees along the bank had just begun to turn, and the water was that particular shade of gray-green that happens just before a clear day breaks open. I stopped walking and just stood there for a while, listening to the water move. I thought about my mother and her house and all the things I carried out of it. I thought about the years of teaching 2nd grade, all the small hands and uncertain faces, all the mornings I showed up when I was tired and showed up again. I thought about Marcus at 11, eating cereal in the kitchen, not complaining. I thought, I did my best with what I had, and now I am doing my best with what I have. That is enough. After all this time, it is genuinely, completely enough.